we're here today to really figure out what downwind sails are for multi-hulls. And I want to lead in the team here real quick about myself. I've been sailing for pretty much my whole life, both racing and cruising boats, but I've spent a lot of time on cruising multi-hulls and really enjoy it. So let me, Bob.
That's Bob. Hi. How y'all doing? I'm Bob Meagher out of Fort Lauderdale. For the last 18, 20 years or so, I've been helping people down here like crazy, but it was about 15, 16 years ago that I first got on a nice, big, comfortable cruising cat with air conditioning and a water maker, and my beer never spilled, and I thought there was something to this. So I've been fortunate to help out a whole lot of people with boats like this since then, and look forward to continuing to do so.
Okay, so Ben Kelly, talk to us down in Australia.
It's waking up, people. But yeah, I was lucky enough to grow up in a sailing family, and my father had beach cats, and I sailed dinghies and skiffs, and I learned pretty quick I enjoyed going fast and the benefits of multi-hull sailing. And you know, in my early 20s, I managed to get involved in some good race boats and be part of some great teams over the years, and I've just continued to love that side of the sport as much as all sailing. But yeah, that's why I'm into it.
Phillip, talk to us. You design these things.
I do, yeah. So I'm Phillip Williamson. I've been with it north for about 17 years now, and I'd started my design with Dacron, cruising Dacron sails, and over the years have expanded across the full product range. So I'd say over the past 5, 6, 7 years, I've focused more on multi-hulls, both performance and racing.
Great, thanks guys. So to start off, I'm going to talk about really the real reasons to have downwind sails for multi-hulls. First of all, the boats are very heavy. They need power. The headsails on them are small, and you can see in this picture is a self-tacking jib, and it's really tiny. What happens is as soon as you fall off the wind at all, you don't have enough sail area to keep the boat going. The other thing that's great about a multi-hull is the boats are very wide, very stable, and this gives you better sheeting angles and allows you to get a bigger sail, more sail area, and better power. So rolling into the next part, you know, guys walk into our office and they say, gee, what sail's best for me? And my answer usually is, I don't know. So then we roll through more of an interview process, which Bob, I think you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, really. I mean, you're right. The sails for boats like this are not one size fits all. It really, they're very customizable depending on what you want to do. We got to figure out what are the performance gaps in the boat. What are you used to? What do you already have? What's the boat set up for? There's a long process and a conversation that we like to go through. I approach it more from the cruising side, trying to make it really easy for people to use, because my belief is the fastest, best sail in the world isn't going to do you a bit of good if you leave it in the bunk down below because it's too much of a pain to use. Ben, what do you ask?
Look, very similar, Bob. I like to, you know, over the years, I've managed to come across people who've had bad experiences or been scared of spinnakers through those bad experiences. And I like to understand people's experience, what they're up for, what they're really searching for. They may be really focused on the handling or the safety of the sail. Or, you know, if their boat's a lighter weight, high performance boat, we might get down into, you know, what are the performance options, how they're going to fill the range of sailing angles and so on. So same process.
Great. So Phillip, why don't you talk about sort of the usage and the polar angles for these sails?
Right. So we're looking at a polar plot right now, a usage plot. And just give a quick description of it. The rings, you'll see they have a 5K, 15, and 25. So that's representing the wind speed. And then the lines that are extending out of the center of the circle are apparent wind angles. So ranging from that 45, 90, 135. So these plots, they will change depending on the performance of the boat. A faster boat may not see the wider apparent wind angles that the G2 is plotted here. So I would like to note that these plots aren't written in stone. A nice, stable, flying G0, it can be designed with a larger overlap into the G1 zone. I mean, that's great. I mean, this plot isn't intended to mean that only the G1 could be flown in that area, but it's a nice guideline for us in the beginning.
That's excellent. Really, that makes a lot of sense. So, Bob, I wanted to find out how you differentiate these sails. I'm really not sure I'm clear, and I'm guessing everyone else isn't either.
We can build a wide variety of shapes and sizes. The question is, how do you differentiate? How do you explain them and tell what one sail is versus another? How do you have a conversation about it? The easiest way is to determine the midgirth of the sail. The midgirth is the line that connects the midpoint of the luff and the midpoint of the leech. When you pull it together and you measure it, that's the midgirth. When you compare it to the foot length, that tells you about the shape of the aspect ratio there of the sail. You can see on the left, if the middle of the sail is 7.5 feet across, for example, and the bottom is 10 feet across, that's a 75% midgirth sail. That would be a classic original racing code 0. On the right, you get a deep runner, a big running, curvy, billowy spinnaker used for going downwind. That would have 100% midgirth. That's how midgirth works to differentiate between the two sails.
Great. So Ben, why don't you talk to us about sort of this sliding scale I know you refer to, and it really helps us.
Yeah, well, I think it's obvious you start with a headsail, a Genoa or a jib, and it's very triangular in nature, and it's designed to be flat enough to sail close to the wind as possible. And as you bear away, you ease that sail off and you find you're lacking horsepower. So, it is a sliding scale in design-wise and midgirth and depth-wise. So, straight up the first sail for a cruiser that's appropriate to get more horsepower is a G0. And you can see the midgirth there, 55 to 65% of the foot. It's probably twice as deep as a Genoa. And, that's really your go-to sail to introduce horsepower to get downwind more efficiently than winging a headsail and a main. Then as you go through, a code 0 is a wider midgirth, deeper version, more 80, 90 degrees sailing angles. And it just keeps growing more plumper or wider in the girth and the depth as you go down. G1, probably considered more of a performance asymmetric spinnaker, but it's your first soft fluff. You can see that curve in the luff. First soft fluff sail, and then the G2 is your classic running deep angle asymmetric spinnaker. Very common.
Now, if I can make an analogy, I know we're all on headshots here, but I've met all you guys in person, and I have to say, Ben, you're like the G0 in the midgirth. I think Phillip, you're probably here. Pete, you're the G1, but when you want to talk really wide, plumpy midgirth, I think I bring up the G2 aspect there.
Yeah, good one. I like it. Okay, so what I like to do now is roll into talking about the G0. And Bob, can you talk to us about sail handling?
Well, and I think something we should point out, when the North product line uses the letter G as the code for the cruising Gennakers. The G0 is this one, the G1 and the G2 you saw on the chart. We'll talk about it in a minute more. It's not a specific sail, as Phillip was implying. We really do try and find a way to make it match the usage and match the boat. The G0 here can span a midgirth. That's pretty range, and I know there's more differences. Phil can explain better than I can. But The most convenient thing about the G0 is its handling. Most of the time I'm supplying a G0 to a client, it is designed to be left up and furled on the furler, like a Geno, like a jib. Just live up there for as long as possible. And we can talk about, you know, the dangers of doing that. But for handling, most of the time a G0 is on a furler. In my neck of the woods here in South Florida where it's sunny, usually with a sun cover. Although there are times that we can build them light and they're more specialty purpose sails and sometimes get away with using a snuffer.
Great. So Ben, walk us through material choices. Boy, there's so many.
Yeah, there is a wide range. You have to realize with the apparent wind angles, you can see this sail may be capable of getting up to 60 degrees, if effectively well forward of the beam. That creates fairly high loadings in the sail, more so than a running asymmetric, and therefore the required cloths to bring it up to that engineering requirement are heavier by nature. And you know, they do start off still using nylons as options, but they might be 2.5 ounce, 3.5 ounce nylons, and then we move through to polyesters, and polyesters is just a more rigid, you know, extremely light version of a polyester Dacron. And that cloth resists the stretch and gives you a more performance shape holding ability to the sail. And ultimately we have a range of single taffeta and film Code Zero laminates, and they're very appropriate to the high loadings on multi-hulls, particularly if you're sailing offshore and you're transferring loads over waves and so on. The sail's extremely strong and capable of being sheeted on hard, which is what you want to do if you want to go fast. So, you know, there's a complete sliding scale of cloth options, and your salesman needs to talk through those with you, and they come at a completely different price range also, but they all have their place.
Great. So Phillip, can you walk us through the design, maybe just the whole engineering process?
Yeah, so we do have accurate measurements from the boat, either from the salesman or some CAD drawings that we would have. And so with that, we would use our tools to come up with the geometry of the sail, taking into account the specifics of any of the furling gear that's being used, and because there's a reduction in lengths for that, as well as the sheeting angles. And if in this image here, we can see this sail is being twinged down. There's a line pulling straight down on the clue sheet. So we take all that to account, and this sail, each sail is, the geometry of it is designed around your boat. It's designed around the boat of the measurements that the salesman is taken off of your boat. And then from that, with the material choice and the conversations that we have with the salesman in regards to the usage with the wind and the apparent wind angle, we then look at the depths of the sail. If we wanted to, if we're looking at a windier, maybe a narrower apparent wind angle sail, we would look at making the sail the mold a bit flatter. We would look at reducing area. And then if it were an application where, say, it was a bit windier, or we started looking at wider angles for the G0, we would look at increasing the area a little bit, as well as the depth. Keeping in mind that we have to take into account the furling aspect of the sail.
Great, thanks.
If I can jump back in, guys, just a thought I had. I've sold these sails as the only downwind sail on some cruising multi-hulls who aren't prepared to go to spinnakers, who may have just been sailing downwind with a headsail and main. So they're pretty versatile, and in the lighter weights, you can still have a sail that furls very easily and safely and can ease out with the wide sheeting angle and sail quite deep. So, you know, we've got a world of options for people, and yeah, this sail's extremely versatile when you get a good designer like Phil in and design to the needs of the client.
Hey Phil, Ben just talked about, you know, wider sails that can do more. And I'm often focused on the guy that is going to be in the Caribbean or going up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and he's just going to leave this thing furled a lot of the time. what are the design differences between a sail you're pushing to be as deep and as broad and as versatile as possible, and one that really is making the convenient sail handling a priority?
The G0, our G0 series, we do start from a well-established base of molds and shapes. And with that, it does take into account the furlability of it. So changes that we would have made from, say, a Code 0 like this here, which is a racing sail, we do look at reducing the leach. So there isn't as much leach to furl in. We do look at a little more hollow in the luff to help with the furl. And other aspects you can look at would be clue heights. You know, having the clue a little bit higher can help with making a nice furl that's repeatable. That would have like a high success rate of a furl, and being able to store it for a longer period of time. So there's we start with a good base where we have focused on that aspect, and then we would take individual applications to account.
Cool. Most of the time that I'm talking to people about these sails, it's less of a performance issue and more of a longevity and a ruggedness issue. We want to make sure that when people are furling the sail and it's flapping like crazy, or if the sheet lets go or something, it's gonna err on the durable side, maybe, even if it gives up some stretch in the material.
Yep.
So we've got something that just lasts a long time under a lot of different punishing conditions when it's on deck, dragging it around, stuff like that.
Maybe a nice opportunity to point out the clue, the Velcro clue in that image.
Oh yeah.
The aspects we do take to help with the storage of the sail.
I can't zoom.
No.
You're zooming.
I mentioned something earlier about furling and one of the dangers we run into. While people want to leave these things up and furled, never trust your Code 0 furler. I tell people that all the time, that they are locked and they furl or unfurl based on the friction between the furling line and the furling drum. If that line goes slack, or the sail jumps around because the wind gets into a fold up top and starts bouncing it, that drum can skip sometimes. And if that drum starts skipping around the line, the sail could start to unfurl. Of course, that's going to happen only when you've got an entire trained crew of America's Cup sailors on board ready to pounce on the problem. No, it's going to happen at 2:30 in the morning after a long day drinking. So don't trust the Code 0 furlers. We have ways to prevent that from happening. We can talk about more later. If anyone has any questions, by the way, on any of this, please put them in the chat and we'll dig deeper. We don't want to go too deep into the weeds unless people want us to go there.
Guys, I want to tell my Chicago boat show story here, because we're all salesmen. And so I go up to a Code 0 furling booth and I'm asking the guy about all these things, and he says, "Oh yeah, we have a fuse in ours." And I said, "Well, I'm looking for what's a lock fuse?" He says, "Yeah, the fuse won't guarantee that it won't roll out, but it'll prevent it most of the time." So I came away from that, like what Bob said, the fuse is just part of it. So remember, if you're told that the drums have locks, they're fuses.
Yeah. And one of the things that we do to make sure that even if the drum does spin, I don't know if you can see in the picture, Phil alluded to it, there's this big rectangle of Velcro here that seals the sail shut. That really helps protect against the thing becoming unrolled accidentally, and makes a really cool sound when you actually trim the sheet in, because the whole thing peels off like a giant Band-Aid.
I'd like to ask Ben a couple of questions before we leave the G0. So Ben, I know you have a lot of clients with smaller multi-hulls. Can you walk us through, a guy has a 30-foot day sailing multi-hull. What kind of choices does he have?
Look, it's down in Aussie land, down under. We have a word that we traditionally refer to these sails to as a screecher, and they come in all shapes and sizes, as we've just been discussing. But the G0 effectively is on the cruisy, deeper end of that sail. In Australia, we have a lot of reaching up and down the coast, and people love to go fast, and we have some great waters. So, you know, the G0 is my go-to sail to give people more horsepower and a bit of fun out on the water. And the beauty of it is the ease of handling from bottom-up furling. So, you know, as far as options go, I've sold these sails in 1.5 ounce nylons to people who really just want to have an easy sail that don't want to sheet it on hard and go up to the wind. And then, you know, at that more highly engineered end, this sail can almost be a bit like a light #1 racing Genoa with the heavier weight laminates. So extremely versatile sail, and it really comes down to each and every person's needs and wants. And that's what we specialize in and have an amazing range of designs for.
Great. Hey, Bob, I wanted to ask you, do we have some images of the Code Zeros, G0s that kind of show? Yeah, that's the slide I was looking for.
Couple options.
Talk to them about that.
This is a nylon, lighter, able to fly in lighter conditions. Over here is a woven polyester. Still great, probably a little more rugged, a little more middle of the road. And this is a more specialized sail for a more performance boat. It's our 3DI product. These are also available in paneled laminates, and it can be a little overwhelming. I've always thought the G0 is the most versatile sail there is, with the widest possible range of fabrics. These are 3 of them.
Great. Great.
You can see that, sorry if I can jump in, Peter,
Ben.
that central image, that's at the triangular end of the scale, the closest sort of apparent wind sailing angle and the most robust fabric engineered for the highest loads. The one on the right is a lot lighter sail. It floats easier to be suitable to you know, lighter air sailing areas, more eased out conditions. They're quite different sails, and they're all G0s.
These show a good example too. And I've often thought the difference is like when your buddy on another boat says he just got a new Genoa. Well, that's a little vague. You don't really know exactly what he got. It could be a 135, but if his boat has a really long fore triangle, then you know it still doesn't tell you much. When you understand how these sails differ from one another, then you can start to get your head around which would be more useful for your application.
Great. Hey, so guys, thanks a lot for that. I think that really clarifies what the G0 product is. And for all of you viewers out there, make sure you send us in your questions. We'll definitely answer them all. So I think we're gonna talk about the G1 and the G2 sails, you know, the downwind asymmetricals. And I think there's a lot going on here again. So I think, Bob, why don't you walk us through sail handling again?
Handling. That's usually the biggest intimidating factor to the cruising crowd with big spinnakers like this. They are large, powerful sails. My thought's always been, what's the point in putting a small chute on a big cat? When the breeze is up, your working sails are probably fine, or a Code Zero is going to help too. You're not going to use a big spinnaker, or you're not going to use a spinnaker in heavier winds, or even sometimes in meteor winds. You want it to be a light to medium air sail, which means let's make it big. Now, if it's big, you got to worry about getting it down. Anybody can put a sail up. The key is getting it down. So how do you get it down, or how do you get it put away? The most common thing has been the dowsing sleeve or the snuffer. I think we got a slide for that over here. People are pretty familiar with them. You go up to the foredeck, you pull the thing down. It looks like this. When you're sailing, it lives up top. It's the most cost effective. It does involve a little more work, a little more arm strength, and requires some familiarity. Once you're familiar with it, it's a great tool. Some people might sail a little more short-handed, might be a little older, might not want to be spending as much time forward. For that, top-down furling is absolutely becoming more and more prevalent. There are absolutely some limitations on it, but the theory is you pull the string and the sail goes away. Like all theories, there are wonderful exceptions, but in a nutshell, that's how the top-down furler works. I can explain more if people want to go there.
Okay, great. Ben, walk us through the fabric choices. I mean, this is a completely different animal. Where are we at with fabric choices?
Well, apart from the really pointy end, which might be a gunboat or even faster boat than we have on screen, generally we're talking woven fabrics for these type of spinnakers. We're looking in the nylons and the polyesters. It's a really great shot there because we can straight up see the different coloration in the clue section and the luff area. And that points out an engineering piece of the puzzle. We do use multiple weights of these fabrics when needed in high load situations. But, you know, at the end of the day, like Bob said, if you got a G2 and it's a 0 to 12, 0 to 15 knot deep running sail, it's going to need to be quite light. So it floats early. You're going to be looking at, you know, 0.9 ounce nylons, 1.5 ounce nylons, you know, at the heaviest end of the scale, 2.2. And then if you want a little bit more performance and you've got a faster boat and you want to hold that shape still in a nice light cloth, there's a range of polyesters as well. So yeah, it's a little more obvious than the G0. We have less options and the sail's got a more specific use.
Great. So, you know, we understand handling, sail fabrics. The design of these things, it's a different animal of the G1 and the G2. So, Phillip, describe what the process is here and how you go about these sails.
Right. So if the sail is ordered as a G1 or a G2, we would go back to the usage chart to get an idea of the angles that we're targeting. So a G1 would tell me is we're not trying to go as deep as a G2 would, and the G2, if I was told as a G2, well, we're trying to get the sail to go a handle as wide apparent wind angle as we can. So those two are triggers for me to be able to start with the sizing of the sail, and then depths with that. So when we speak of a G1 and G2 with regards to depth, the G2 would start to become fuller than the G1. So you're having more material through the middle, as well as we start designing the luff lengths longer. We want the luff to project away from, you can imagine a straight line tacked ahead. We want to be able to have the luff of the sail project away from that straight line and rotate around, so you're capturing some of the wind to the weather side of the boat. So those are two things from the G1 and G2. But then we have to go back always to the handling of it. So if we're told we're going to be using a top-down furler to handle this sail, to douse it, great for G1, okay, I think not a problem. But once we start looking at, we want a G2, but we're doing a top-down, it's contradictory a little bit in that we want the sail to be full, long luff, try to get off the wind as much as we can, but then that causes some issues with top-down. So there's limits with regards to the handling. G1, top-down, not a problem. When we get a G2, I would start encouraging snuffers for that. We're not limiting the design of the sail to handle the retrieval system, and we can just use a snuffer to encapsulate the whole sail and bring it down. So it goes back to the windage, the angle, how we're handling the sail, and then the angle and the windage then brings us back to the cloth. The weight of the cloth and the distribution of the weights.
Cool.
Excellent.
Hey, he's talking about luff lengths and G2s and all that. I want to show that video. Can I take a minute for that?
Send it.
This was a G2 long luff on a top-down furler on a Sayona 47 about a month and a half ago. This is not a marketing video. This is me and an iPhone on a sea trial. But it really shows how a top-down furler can just make the sail go away. Let's put it here. You
So I
saw
think
the
at this
bottom,
point, we could just
there's
note
the
that
top.
the top down, there's a swivel at the tack there that the tack of the sail is attached to, and that can free float. So the drum spins and all the torque goes through that. It goes all the way up to the head. So the head's spinning while the tack is not. The tack is not spinning. And that's in reference to the top down furl.
And why is that important, Ben, to have it go top down on a free flying, free luff?
Well, you can't go bottom up on something that's got such great girth and depth. You'll end up with a big loose mess. So by going to top down and capturing all that fabric, as you can see in the video, and getting a nice tight furl up top, you're getting rid of the windage on that sail. And your soft, lightweight fabric, as you can see in the video, is bending around that torque cable and getting rid of the sail. You know, whether we want to talk about some of the, not negatives, but difficulties that can arise. I don't know, maybe Bob wants to go there, but, you know, these sails need to be designed to work with the system is where we're coming from.
And I'll tell you one thing I've learned too. These things take a lot of rotations to furl these sails. If a code 0, you could go forward, you could have the loop, the furling loop up forward, you could sit on the deck and you could furl it yourself. These things, I'm going to stop it there. Oh, sorry, I meant to stop it there. These things, when you go forward like this, if you're going to pull this by hand, you're going to be pulling it for a long time. That's a lot of rotations. This boat has the furling line led back through some hardware, all the way back up to the cockpit onto an electric winch. So you can just push a button and watch the sail go away. Now, every cruising cat is different, especially leopards. The path that some of these lines have to take to get up to the helm onto a winch is really tricky. So your mileage may vary here. Need to have a good path for the furling line to lead any of these furling lines back to the cockpit. But in consultation with a rigger or a project guy, we can usually get it figured out.
And that was a nice furl in the end. Looking up, that shot that you looked up, that was a nice tight furl.
Yeah.
Bob must have been hitting the button and the client must have been doing the sheet.
No way. No. Client and his wife were operating the whole thing nice and easy. One thing, despite the fact that it looks like a nice snug furl, these sails cannot be left up. The next thing we do right now is take that sail down. Nylon like this is very UV susceptible. It cannot have a sun cover. While you might cruise around, you know, for another couple of minutes like this, it's best to get in the habit of, once you furl this up, go ahead and take it down.
Great point. So I'd like to roll into some questions. I like to ask you guys some scenarios that I get asked. You know, sometimes people ask me, do I need 2 sails, or I would like 2 sails. I have a client, Barry Simmons, who has a main cat 30, and we built a G0 for him, and we also built a G2. And so, Ben, maybe walk us through why someone would have 2 downwind sails on a cat.
Look, by creating a specific, well, filling a specific gap, as you can see on this chart, you're going to get the most efficient, stable sail, and stability is a big thing when you're running autopilot or you're short-handed, and you're going to get a sail that's engineered or fit for purpose. You know, in case of the blue G2, it, like we said earlier, it can be quite light. That means that it can float early and have a really low end usage in the wind range, and its shape is designed for that. So when you're using that sail, it works really, really well, and you're not taking it way out of its range, like shitting it on really hard and trying to reach with it. The G0, also same thing. It's got a pretty wide range, but it's specifically designed shape-wise and engineering-wise to handle those angles. When you try to do it all with one sail, you are compromising either end of that scale, and you know, you're going to create a sail that is not perfect at each end, you know. So it is best to try to cover your downwind sailing with a minimum of 2 sails.
I have to say, after talking with Phillip about sail shapes, though, and all this stuff, for the guy that's looking to get, you know, his new boat shows up, it's got a main and a jib, and he just needs one more sail. Sure, in the future, maybe, but right now there's no plan for it. He just wants one sail. That ends up, for the people, again, that I'm used to dealing with who are interested in, I'd say, a little more convenience than power. It ends up being either a rugged G0 or straight into a G1, something that's just a little more all-purpose, a little more forgiving, might get away with a sock. You can go to a 1-sail option. You can go to a 2-sail option. Sometimes if people are doing circumnavigations and really want to cover the range, they can go to 3. But then, honestly, storage space starts to become an issue. We have ways around that too. Phil's taught me that you can push these shape boundaries pretty hard and be very happy with the results.
One thing too that we do take into account would be, say, the size of your upwind sails. Some planforms that have a self-tacking track with a high aspect jib, the jibs are really small. There are other setups with trimarans as well, where there are tracks a little further aft, and that head sail is a bit larger. So there isn't as much of a need as you start bearing off to get to the G0 right away. So stressing that upwind sail area, that needs to be taken into account too when you start talking about what is your next sail that you're going to use as you bear off.
Neat.
Yeah, so I was just thinking that, you know, some people are actually racing Wednesday nights. They're racing point to point. And when I say racing, I'm talking cruiser racer. It's a culture, I think, worldwide, to make it so people don't have to round up 10 of their closest friends. They can do this.
You can't anymore.
Well, at any rate.
For all those of you in the future viewing this, yeah, we're right in the middle of the whole quarantine COVID thing right now. That explains the hair and a little bit of the bitterness. But go ahead.
Yeah, okay, Patches.
This was supposed to be timeless. No.
Yeah. As someone said to me recently, this is not speed dating. You gotta take time on this. At any rate, so, you know, in Wednesday night sailing, when I first met, as an example, Barry, we went out and sailed a couple different times, and it became really obvious to me that as soon as this boat fell off to 50 degrees apparent, it was very slow, and that's because his jib was really small. And then when we got to 90, the boat would overrun the wind speed. So I insisted that we get, you know, a bigger G2 downwind sail. And after plenty of sailing, we realized, you know what, we got to go there as well. And he does a lot of cruising, Bahamas. And so I just want to make a point here. You know, you don't have to break your bank and buy 2 sails, but there is plenty of times where, you know, you might consider 2 downwind sails for multi-hulls. So, you know, I was thinking, Ben, you and I talked the other day, talk about, you know, sailing up down the coast. You go from Brisbane to the Whitsundays, and that's a big culture there. And, you know, talk to us about that. That's what people are doing in Australia, where you are.
Yeah, we've got a great east coast of Australia, going from Tasmania down the bottom, where we have very low humidity, quite often high winds, ocean crossings to get across Bass Strait. And then as we come up the coast, the humidity, the temperature rises, we have generally lighter airs, and boats are sailing the whole east coast and quite often venturing up into Asia. So we have a whole range of conditions that people may be taking into account, or we may be taking into account when we're advising on the sail options and the fabrics. And humidity is one that we've all talked about in the past that comes into it, particularly up into Asia. So that's something you'll hear us discussing with you if you're a cruiser that's sailing long distances or into different climates.
Hey, so Bob, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to furlers, there's a lot to choose from, and I get confused as to what to choose from. Do we assist in that process, or how does that?
Yeah, a lot of times, like a new boat sometimes comes with it. The manufacturer likes to sell the package, which is great. Sometimes they don't. The first thing we're trying to figure out is bottom up versus top down. If it's a code 0 or G0 style sail, it's almost always bottom up. There are some times where, especially on larger boats, larger boats sometimes benefit from a top down furler, even on a G0. If they've got a high clue, if they've got more roach in the back, there's some things there. But basically, in terms of the brands, they're all pretty good at this point. The key really comes into, we keep saying it, how the sail is going to be used. If it's a relatively lighter reaching sail like that, it opens up the possibilities because you're not really going to be pushing the limits, the load limits of an appropriately sized furler. If I get the sense someone really wants to use this as an overgrown Genoa and we're up in cloth and they're going to push it like crazy, that's when I want to stick at what I consider, well, I won't name brands, but maybe some of the higher range of furlers, just because of the greater load capacity, some of the experience that they've got with some of the offshore racing stuff. Let the racers break the stuff. Cruisers just want it to be easy, simple, and know it's going to work. If we stay within the limits and match the furler to how the sail is going to be used, you never have to give them a second thought.
Excellent. I'd like to ask Phillip to take off his design hat right now, and he sails, and he lives in one of my favorite places in the world up in Canada, and the Lake Ontario area. Tell us about sailing there and multi-hulls and the culture. I find it fascinating. You have a pretty short sailing season, so what's happening there?
Yeah, right. So it is a short sailing season. It can be. What bookends what would be the cruising sailing season. So into this early spring and the late fall, it can be pretty windy. And then typically through the summer, it becomes a bit lighter. It can be a lot of fun in that the water, especially in the Lake Erie area, it's pretty shallow. So the waves can pick up pretty quick. So there could be a lot of exciting sailing. One of the events that happens throughout July and August that stands to mind is we have a very strong short-handed series. So it's 2 people, 1 boat.
Wow.
Every other weekend or so, we pick a point. You pick point destination, you stay over that night, and then you sail home the next day. So there's some nice. We also have lots of racing, up and downwind racing. And then there's just beautiful areas to sail around and anchorage places. So there's such a variety of types of sailing.
Hey, Phil, I sailed on Lake Michigan once, and the weirdest thing happened. We were going upwind, we hit a wave, and I got doused with this water. But yeah, it wasn't salty. It was so weird. Does that happen a lot?
I think where Ben sails, you could wipe it off your face and use it on your hot dog. There's a lot of it. So the other thing I want to ask is customer education. We've talked about the different sails and so on and so forth. What do we offer? What's our culture here at North Sails for customer education? Does it end at the delivery of the sail? What are we doing there, Ben?
I mean, if I speak from my own point of view, I've and I believe we do it all around the world. I've just spent the last 20 years having great experiences with customers of all sailing levels, and some of the most enjoyable experiences are breaking out that new sail, and downwind sails are the most fun with a customer. They may be a short-handed couple who've got their first boat, and getting out there, and 50% of what we do at that point is the sail making, and 50% is almost sail training or helping with the experience that we have to make the usage of these sails enjoyable, safe, and get the most out of them for people wanting to cover miles.
That's great.
If I could add, Pete, one thing I tell everybody, we are in the entertainment business. These are, for most people, these are toys. They want to go sailing. They want to enjoy the giant investment they have in their boat. They want as little hassle as possible. And they just want to know that the time that they have to go is not going to be spent either going slow, having things break. They want to make the most of what they're doing. We're here to help people have fun.
Yeah, so I want to throw this in here. Bob's my boss, and I am always looking for excuses to go sailing. So I'll tell him, you know, I have a sea trial today, and I will meet any of you, and if you want to go sailing for 4 hours, 8 hours, I'm your guy. I will teach you as much as you want to know, and I'll tell Bob, customer education. That's what we need to do.
What it's all about.
He always rolls his eyes and said, oh, what have you done for me lately?
And then he walks back in the door and says, I just met 3 people because I was on the dock talking to this guy.
So I'd like to turn it over to the group, and maybe we can answer some questions for y'all. I think Louisa's paying attention here because she's driving this thing.
Lurking.
Here.
Yes, we do. We have some questions. The first one is, how does a hard luff versus a soft luff impact furling, ease of use, and wind angle range for a 44-foot mid-performance cruising cat?
Man, Bob, you're all over that one.
You know, I'm going to give you my answer, but I know someone on this call who's going to be able to be a little more technical with it. In general, tight luff on a G0 sail means it's a furling sail, and you can take it a little higher, like that. The tighter you get that luff, usually the better you furl it, and the higher you can go. That's the answer in a nutshell.
The other side to it, Bob, is that
I wasn't talking about you.
Well, I'm diving in, Bob. The other side of it that always comes up when we're talking about those G0s is the ability for a sail to have a UV strip and stay up in the air when needed, when the boat's manned. So that's the other side of it, is does the sail need to stay up at all for a period of time? And a bottom-up tight luff sail is the neatest, most aerodynamic sail to achieve that. As soon as you move to a soft set luff on a G1 or a G2, I consider those sails furling options purely for dousing or setting the sail. They're no longer an option for the sail to live in the air for any period of time.
I will say one of the nice features about furled spinnakers is they usually take up a little less storage space in the boat. When you sock it, there's still a bunch of air in it. Now you can squish all the air out of the bag with straps and be able to get it down a bow locker. But furling sails, you can kind of flake on top of themselves so they make a long sausage that you can stick in more places. It's just, it's a nice little benefit sometimes. Did that answer the question?
I think so. The next question we have is, how do you prevent the code 0 from unfurling when not wanted?
Yeah, so Ben, talk to us about that.
It's really got to be a combination of things. The first thing with any furling sail is to remember that torque cable needs to be tight in terms of how much tension you've pulled on your halyard with the winch, or if you've got a halyard lock system on a bigger boat, how much tack down you pull. That's how you get an effective furl, a nice tight furl, and that is the first place to start is a nice tight furl. The next thing that we do is we discussed earlier the clue Velcro on, say, a G0, and that's just an added security measure that as the last part of the sail comes in and furls, the Velcro grabs on itself over a pretty good area, and it literally stops the clue from being able to unfurl without quite a bit of load. So when you do come to unfurl, you'll see you need to give the sheet quite a tug to break that Velcro, and then she'll unfurl. The other side of it is with the double furling line on a continuous line furler, we need to have that line taut and tight so that it's grabbing on the spool and stopping the spool from being able to spin. We then have the rigging companies offering lock or fuse options on the furlers. That's just an added security measure, all against unfurling. And, you know, and then I've seen people get creative. Bob mentioned to me the other day, a soft shackle can be woven through the spool to, you know, as an added security, so it simply cannot spin. I've had people use a Phillips head screwdriver with a piece of bungee cord, you know, hitched onto the handle that you put through the holes, and, you know, but that could damage the furler. But really, you've got to think about when you're leaving these sails in the air. It's the most common insurance claim in Australia. We call them screeches a lot of the time on the ground here, is, you know, unfurling when the boat's unattended in a marina quite often, or if you're asleep in an anchorage at night. So, you know, you got to be really serious about when you leave these sails in the air, and the boat needs to be attended.
Okay.
All right, we have another one asking, if you plan on taking the sail down immediately, can you use a bottom-up furler instead of a top-down with a G1 loose luff and no torque cable?
What do you say, Phil?
Yeah, so the image that I have of that when that happens is it's going to start furling at the tack first. And it'll furl up the foot. It'll continue along to the foot, bringing in the clew. And you'll start being able to wind up some of the lower section of the sail. But by the time the clew gets to, say, the luff, the whole top of the sail will have been untouched. It will not have furled. You would also do require some luff tension. So knowing that in that question, we're saying that there is no cable, there's no torsion cable. There would still be, say, a small Dyneema cord in the luff of the G1, but the design of that sail potentially is too long to be able to get a tight luff for that furl. So I would, when we start talking about sails that are 75 mid-girth, so even with the G0s, and then definitely when you go to the G1 and then a G2, we would recommend 100% a top-down furl.
And here's the good news. If you've already got the furler and you've already got the torque rope, if it's a late model furler, a major brand, most of them now are making little adapters that plug into the top of the Code Zero furler that have the swivel that you can attach the spinnaker to. You can use a Code, for, again, most major brands, you can use a Code Zero furler as a top-down furler by adding an adapter. That adapter with its torque rope that lives with that G1 or that G2, that goes away. Then you can plug the Code Zero back into the same furler that's still there. Then you're done with the Code Zero. You get rid of that. You bring back in the G1 or the G2. You plug it in, and you're good to go. So the same bottom-up furler can do double duty.
Excellent. So I'm just looking at a question here from Mark Cotgrove. He does a lot of dinghy racing, and his question is, you know, all this furling pains him. I get it. What are the cons of leaving sails furled versus the longevity? And Philip, I would like you to address that one.
You definitely see it as soon as you unfurl it. You will see if there isn't enough wind pressure to pressurize a sail, you will see creases. You'll see wrinkles in there. And as the wind pressure will come up, they come out. You know, they come out. If you left it up furled, there is potential to do some long damage, some permanent damage. So if you tried to do a really, really full sail with this top bottom up idea, you would have those issues. I'm not-
Also, the fabric's so light that, you know, the looser parts of the furl can catch in the wind. You can get a rhythmic vibration, and you start to head down a road of unfurling when you don't want it. So there's a safety issue as well.
Do you think there's a difference, say, with a laminate? So this, we're looking at a G0 here, that's a laminate. So as opposed to a polyester, you know, say a Stormlight cloth, some polyester cloth. I would think off the top of my head that the furl would do less damage to the Stormlight, to the polyester woven cloth, than a laminate cloth.
There's no doubt that any woven fabric has a more durable element. It's kind of a trade-off, you know. It's more elastic. It's more, it's not glued together in separate parts. So it has a longer life and is more durable and resists what is happening to it when it's being forced to go around a furling cable.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're looking at durability when furling, it tends to be the woven fabrics that are going to give you more durability but less performance.
I will say though that when the luff lengths start getting longer and you're getting into say 55, 60-foot cats and up, the weight difference between the specific Code Zero laminates versus the wovens starts to become a little more substantial. And just sail handling on deck, moving that thing around when it's down starts to be a little different. The physical weight of the sail when it's flying starts, in my mind, starts to make more of a difference. So even me, when I'm usually looking for rugged, tough, indestructible, and I'll give up shape, at some point in the larger boats that are cruising, I think the physical weight starts to play a difference as well.
Yeah, so we have another question here from Chris Block. He owns a Lagoon 450F. And Bob, I'd like to ask you this. His question is, so if he has his tack line, goes through the bowsprit to a clutch, he's asking about adjusting the tack up and down. And then he's saying, or should he have a furler on the bowsprit? He's got a G1 at 87% asymmetrical with no sock. So he's kind of has two questions there. Could you address the tack height?
You want me chiming in?
Yes.
I think first the question is there a 2-to-1 halyard? If there is a 2-to-1 halyard, you can adjust the tension on both ends, and that's great. If there's just a 1-to-1 halyard, then it'll be easier to adjust luff tension at the bottom if you can adjust it. If it's just going to a clutch, this might seem like it's off topic, but one of the best advantages of having a 2-to-1 at the tack with the clutch is you can hook up the furler from standing on the trampoline behind the gull striker and then just pull it out without having to kind of lead over and risk falling in the water and ruining your phone. Not that that's ever happened to me. As far as the luff tension goes, if you're talking about like floating the tack of the G1 for better sail shape, you could do that in the way you're talking by loosening the line or loosening the halyard, but you'd absolutely have to retighten it to furl. That might be an extra step. Most of the time, I think you would just take the line that connects the tack of the sail to the furler, find your happy medium, consistent spot where you'd like to leave it, and leave it there. And then maybe if you knew you were going to be beam reaching for a day, it'd be worth a trip forward to adjust it.
You know, Ben, I wanted to ask you a question. So there's a question here about torque ropes, and I think there's a lot of choices out there. Do you have any commentary on different qualities, how you would go about recommending that?
I won't bother talking about brands, but, you know, if you're getting a price for something that seems to be way cheaper than what we're specing, be careful. The torque cable is so critical to the success of the furl. You know, and there's products that go way up to the highest level. There's a huge price range, but generally what you're finding is we've already learned there is no low end option that's going to work really, really well. We need to go with, there's a range of options in the middle there that are really stiff. They've come a really long way in 10 years and they just work. So I don't know how to describe it any other way. You need to trust your salesman that he's advising you on the best torque cable to get the best result.
I have a design question here from Mark Cockgrove that I want to give Phillip. So this is a great question. We didn't really talk about this much, but the G2 angles on the polar chart, are those from a centrally tacked sail, or would you necessarily go to the windward hull in a light breeze to go lower? I mean, what can you address that, Phil?
Yeah, this plot is generally for a centrally tacked sail. The conversation came up with the salesman, the customer, that we wanted to start to pull the tack over to the side. We would take that to account. One of the things that would change is that when you change the base angle, you're changing the sheeting angle of the sail when you do that. And then with that, you're changing how the luff is going to see the apparent wind angle. And so it's almost like you're easing the end of thwartship track, you're letting that go out, so like to an outrigger, let's say, and then you'd maybe sheeting on a bit harder to get your mid twist back in. So with that, we would be looking at the luff entry of the sail, and I would make it maybe a little more circular and not as elliptical. So I would be trying to take a little bit of the depth off of the front of the sail because the sail is rotating with help of a sheet angle change.
Great.
So we do, but that is a conversation that you would want to have with the salesman, in part to help with the setup of how it is that you're actually going to be pulling it to the weather hull.
Can I bounce back to the torque cable again? Just to explain something that does come up, and it also marries in with the engineering of the fabrics. A good quality torque cable is important on all of the sails, but what you will find, the closer to the wind the sail sails, the bigger the torque cable needs to be. So you will see more expense in that item in a G0 than a top-down furling G1. So the torque cable sizing is important as well. So the higher the load, the bigger the torque cable needs to be to work efficiently. And by nature of the beast, as you go to a deeper running sail, it's a lower expense for that torque cable. It may be half the size of the G0 cable.
And on that note too, there's so many different topics that could lead into a question about helix. There's these we design sails around this helix idea, this idea of load sharing. And so with that, you can come to your salesman, and you can come to North Sails, and we could say, here's what our estimate of what your tack loading would be for different sails, and that would help select with furling gear. But with the helix side of things, with our sails now, is that we are starting to engineer those cables specifically purposed for the application of our plot here, as well as the material of the sail. So the whole idea is we're trying to share, we start trying to share loads between these cords, these cables, and the sail material itself. And with that, what's happening is the tack loads are starting to reduce. And the cables then become designed they're not as bulky. There's less strain. We're allowing it to strain a little bit more. Cables are a bit thinner, a little more pliable, with less tack loading. So there's, that's a whole topic to be able to talk to your salesman about, but it's something definitely that we take into account.
I'd like to ask Bob a question. He's been doing this a long time on cruising multi-hulls, and he's really versed in all these sails. And one of them is, what about symmetrical spinnakers, Bob? I know you did a lot of that in the early days.
Done some. They've got a tighter range. They're much more of a, I won't say, well, they can be dead downwind, and a little higher. The people that I've worked with that usually are interested in that tool to sail almost exclusively deeper angles, are usually crossing the Pacific or riding trade winds in a certain direction. I don't think I have a graphic, but it lets you use both bows to fly the sail with the tack on the windward bow, and then sheet it off to leeward like it would be with an asymmetrical. The biggest advantage that a symmetrical sail has over an asymmetrical is jibing. Jibing's a snap. You use one line, you pull in the other. Jibing and asymmetrical just requires dousing and then releading the tack and the sheet, usually, unless you're using two sheets. Symmetrical's real easy. So if you know that it's coming home from the Caribbean at the deeper angles or sailing across the Pacific, a symmetrical sail absolutely has a use on big cruising cats. It's a little more specific, but a great tool.
Great. I know we're getting to the end of this. I wanted to ask Ben a question that you just prompted. He's got a lot of guys that sail high performance boats. Talk to us about jibing. I mean, I know you can jibe these sails. To walk us through that a little bit, you know, if you had a Corsair 750 or something like that.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really passionate about on board the boats and makes a huge difference is getting to know the angles you need to be sailing at before and out of a jibe. And, you know, that's useful on any boat with any handling system. You know, you've got to work as a team. I'm going to try not to go into a racing mode, but basically you need to have a little bit of speed going into a jibe. You need to have a full sail, not a collapsed sail. And you know, one of the tricks that comes from the skiff days is with an asymmetric spinnaker, if it's jibing around the outside, you need to ease loads and loads of sheet. Make sure it comes off the drum and that you're ready to tail in. If you're jibing on the inside, you need to hold the sheet for just a little whisker of time as you go through the eye of the wind, prepared to jibe the sail, and that will actually help keep it back from the luff and prevent twisting. So I think the biggest thing is knowing the angles in and the angles out, and working as a team to release the sheet at the right time. And there is two different ways to jibe a spinnaker, around the outside and through the inside.
Ben, on behalf of most of my clients, I'd like to ask, do you have to put your beer down when you're doing that, or can you do it one-handed?
Yeah, you're going to have to put the beer down. There's a bit of physical labor there. I mean, the other side of this story is if you're a double-handed cruiser and you've got a top-down furler, you can furl the sail, jibe the boat and unfurl. You know, if you've got a spinnaker snuffer, you can snuff the sail, jibe the boat and redeploy. So there's a few different ways to go about it. The main thing is doing it in a way that matches the amount of physical output you want to put in and the safety factor and the breeze and conditions you're in. You know, if you're in a big sea, it may be a really good idea to snuff that sail or furl that sail and just focus on getting your main sail across.
Yeah, so we call that the AARP jibe. Just take our time, jibe over, roll it out, all good. So looks like we want to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for taking the time. I know everybody's situation is different, and I really hope that you've found this informative and feel like you've got some new questions to ask. I also want to let you know that we are really concerned about everyone's families, and if you need any help from anybody at North Sails with anything that relates to what's going on with the COVID-19, please reach out to us. We're making face masks, we're doing all kinds of things. So again, thank you for doing this, and I really appreciate Bob, Phillip, and Ben's time. Ben got up, I think it's like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning there. But thank you, really appreciate it, guys. This was great.
And the unseen hero, of course, Louisa, for helping on the back end, making all this happen.
The speed.
Anytime. The link for this will be on YouTube afterwards, everyone. So feel free to take a look there. And if you have any questions, reach out to these guys and they'll be happy to help you. Have a good evening, everyone.